It's a very transforming experience, and I have no doubt whatsoever that people who have near-death experiences come back from that and are like, there's no reason for us to be mad at each other. There's no reason for us to hate each other or the way that we act with each other, because there's nothing like that going on upstairs. All right, welcome everybody to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I am a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, longtime fan of the creepy and the paranormal.
Good evening.
And he has picked out a video for me to check out and react to. I don't know what it is, but we are about to find out together.
My name is Janice Miner Holden, and I'm a
Hello,
professor
Janice.
emerita of counseling from the
Dr.
University of
Janice.
North Texas.
Dr.
I
Janice.
spent 31 years on the counseling faculty preparing licensed professional counselors and school counselors. About a third of professors' job is to do research. And so my research area was near-death and related experiences. So for
Okay.
about 3 decades, I was looking into various aspects of near-death experiences and the ways that they relate to counseling, but even beyond that. So I studied everything that is typical about near-death experiences and some particular focus.
Okay, so this is
I
As
figured
you-
it was a topic you would find interesting.
this is, as you know, something that I'm happy to speak on.
Yeah.
Right. I'm curious to see what a professor has to say about it. Usually these videos are people who've been through it, so they're
As opposed
Re-
to someone who's done like research on the subject.
right. Like I'm not sure how you research that. I'll be
Well-
curious to know what she's researching.
Yeah, and what conclusions she's come to. I mean, I don't know much about how that process would go either.
Yeah, like how do you research? Let's find out.
Yeah.
I'd be curious. I have had near death experience, or not my physical body being dead, but I have experienced my own death as well as helped other people cross over. So we'll see what she has to say. I'll be interested to see.
I specifically have not.
Yeah.
On their connection to counseling. The field of near-death studies actually began, it's credited to have begun in 1975 with Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And that's the book where he created the term near-death experience, and he had interviewed about 100 people who'd had near-death experiences and noticed that there were these similarities in their experiences and there were after effects. So he compiled all that in that book. And as a result, people who wanted to do more really controlled scientific research jumped onto the topic. And originally, the field focused on the nature of the experience itself and then the after effects. And so those were some of the things that I focused on as well. And then I branched out into other areas, such as there's a phenomenon where somebody who's had a near-death experience and discloses it to somebody else, what kind of experience they have in the way the person reacts to them. And we know that when someone has had a near-death experience and they disclose it, that first disclosure has a big impact on how they're going to proceed to integrate the experience. If the first confidant responds in a helpful way through things like identifying what the experience, that this was a near-death experience, avoiding pathologizing the person or the experience, like not thinking that or saying that it's crazy or that the person's crazy for having had it, not
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, I understand that people are skeptical. Right? If you've never experienced something like this, see how it's
There's a certain natural tendency
there's
towards
a
skepticism.
I understand that, but one of the worst things you can do,
Is call them crazy.
right, or to start like she said, like, oh well, I'm sure that it was just, the try to diagnose people, you know what I mean, like this is plainly, you're plainly this or that, or obviously it was just, your brain was reliving some trauma while you were, it's writing people off instead of just listening to them and accepting at face value. Whether you believe it's real or not, it's not helpful to to degrade somebody else's experience frankly because you don't feel comfortable with it, right? It's not a helpful thing to do at all.
It's better to treat it seriously and accept it for what it is.
Exactly, which is why
You don't necessarily have to believe it for it to matter,
right.
not demonizing the experience, saying that it's in some way evil, and acknowledging
Yeah,
at
there's that
least the
too.
potential reality, if not the reality of the experience, because it feels absolutely real to people who've had it, then that's a positive disclosure experience, and the person's likely to go on and integrate the experience well. And if the confidant does the opposite of those things, then the person goes on to have problematic process. They kind of get psychospiritually stuck until they encounter an atmosphere in which they can be their experience and they are accepted and help to inquire into the meaning and significance of the experience for them. So I got into that whole disclosure area. And then I also became very interested in the aspect of near-death experiences where the experiencer meets deceased loved ones and the whole phenomenon of after-death communication that also happens to a lot of people outside the context of a near-death experience. So I see my two areas of specialization as near-death experiences themselves, the experience, after effects, disclosure issues, implications for our understanding of consciousness and so forth, and then also after death communication and the role of that in grief and grief counseling. I've come to conceptualize near-death experiences as having kind of like three levels. At the deepest level are some features that are found in near-death experiences across cultures. So, for example, meeting deceased loved ones is one of them that happens very frequently in near-death experiences across cultures. And perceiving the material world from a position outside the physical body, that's very nearly universal. Moving rapidly through space, whether it's material space or some transmaterial space, that's a common theme. Light is a common theme in across cultures in near-death experiences. Now, that doesn't mean that each of these things happens in every experience, but it's more like if you look at 100 near-death experiences or 1,000 of them, you see that these themes recur very commonly among people. So that's that deep kind of almost universal level. And then the next.
So she's not wrong. There's almost always a couple of elements that help a lot, or a combination of those elements.
Yeah.
Transitioning back to non-physical reality from physical reality is a little bit like depressurizing. Like, imagine you were deep sea diving
And you were coming back up to the surface.
Yeah, this physical reality is a super dense, compacted energy to facilitate physical interaction. So when you disseminate from that, it's almost like there's a need to acclimate a little bit more slowly. Like, you don't want to get the spiritual bends. Like, so there is some imagery that helps. The imagery of some sort of movement or transition is helpful. So like moving into the light or being shot through space, like stars shooting past you, or even just I've walked people through fields or around a physical barrier, right? Something that helps them understand that we're making a transition from one area to another, but because we're coming from the physical reality, we often get an imagery that looks like some sort of movement, because to us that helps
That
us
indicates,
helps us indicate a movement.
And light is sort of like a beacon of sorts. You move in a direction, like if you were out in the woods stuck in darkness, you might see a light and try to move towards
and
that.
Move towards the light. For us, light equals safety. It equals being able to see clearly, and really that's what we're moving back to, is safety, being able to see clearly. It's something attractive that draws us.
It's a universal symbol, and that's what she's talking about here with the cross-culture thing, is that everybody understands that.
All humans will understand daylight, the sun. Light is a safety. It's being
Light
able to
good.
see. Yeah, light good, basically. And many people do get met by loved ones. And again, you're a lot less likely to be skeptical or fearful if you're going with somebody that you know, that you feel comfortable with. It's not the case in all cases, but it's helpful sometimes for people to see a loved one that makes them feel safer to move on. And again, it's something all people have in common. All people have a family of some kind. If you have somebody who's passed over, you would recognize, like, if it was us, maybe you would see Grandma or Uncle Charlie. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Oh, it's Uncle Charlie. It's okay to go. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It would be a safety feeling. So.
Level, the second of the three levels, is what I call the cultural level. And that's where, because in near-death experiences, people are in a different reality than this reality that, this material reality we're in. What they perceive often doesn't directly translate into terms that we use in earthly language. And so people tend to perceive what they're experiencing through their cultural lens because it's the only way they know how to understand or interpret what they're seeing. And sometimes I think culture can even influence what form that universal theme takes. At the third level is what I call the individual level, and that's where no two near-death experiences are exactly alike, and they're always unique personal aspects to each one. So let's just take the theme of moving rapidly through space. In the West, it's real common for people to report that in their near-death experience, they moved rapidly through a tunnel-like structure or some other structure or some other open space. But there's this rapid movement through a non-material space, but that has some form, usually some form. Sometimes it can just be movement through blackness, but it often takes some form like a tunnel-like thing. And in New Zealand, a near-death experiencer might experience themselves moving rapidly over the island of New Zealand toward what they call the jumping off place of souls. So you can see that you've got the same theme of rapid movement, but it's taking a different form depending on whether someone is a Westerner or a native New Zealander, a Maori. But then, even then, if you just look at Westerners who have moved rapidly through a tunnel-like enclosure, no two tunnels are even described alike. Some people say that it's a dark tunnel with a light at the end. Others say that it's a light tunnel that is even brighter at the end. And other people say that it's this undulating with all these colors and things. Some people perceive other spirits in the tunnel, others don't. So you've still got rapid movement through a tunnel-like structure, but it's already taking the rapid movement, the universal theme is taking its cultural form of a tunnel, which tends to be reported more in the West. And then the personal level is that even the specific form and appearance of the tunnel varies from one person to the other. I see a difference between the idea of religion or any aspect of one's cultural upbringing influencing the experience and dictating it. I think that there's definitely influence. I think there's reason to think that it doesn't dictate because people sometimes have experiences related to religious beliefs that absolutely contradict their religious upbringing. They may expect any of a number of things, but what's going to happen when they have a near-death experience is something that might be very different from what they...
Yeah. Okay. So once you transition into non-physical reality, it's going to be, how do I say this well, a consistency more like a dream state than it is physical reality.
Yeah.
In a dream, you're constructing the reality around you as you go. You're not necessarily aware that you're doing it, but the reality is being constructed, and it's based on not just your culturalizations, like she's saying, and not just like your religious beliefs or whatever it is. It's coming from a much more subconscious level a lot of times, just like your dreams are. So it's not necessarily what you're expecting to see, it's what you need to see in order to understand what's happening. And that's going to be very personal and individual for each person. A lot of people, I mean, I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but a lot of people are raised in a certain religion and even profess to believe that religion. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of actually passing on, they're not so sure, right? So
things are a little bit less.
What's going to sort of form and materialize around you is going to be whatever it is that personality construct really needs to see in order to understand what's happening.
Which may or may not have anything to do with the religion that they spent their life.
Right, exactly. That's going to be a very individual thing. It's going to be whatever imagery is most natural and easiest for them to understand, basically.
All right.
They believed. And one of the most common after effects is people leaving organized religion, not because they're rejecting it, but just because they find that it's too small to explain what they experienced in their NDE, that their religion doesn't account for what they actually experienced and now know to be the nature of death and consciousness and the universe and that sort of thing. One little research study I did was I found all the near-death experience accounts that I could on the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation website, where there are thousands of people who've submitted their NDEs from around the world, really. And the ones that made a reference to Jesus and to describing his physical characteristics. And I found, I think, something like 17 cases. And then I compared, like, what color was his hair? What color were his eyes? What was he wearing? What did his voice sound like? And just the voice, take that for example. One person said that his voice was like lilting music. Another said that his voice was like a powerful freight train. And his eyes, one person said they were blue, one said they were brown, one said that his eyes weren't a color, but they emanated light. And I found no two descriptions of Jesus that were identical. There was a little bit of a clue in two of the cases. These were two people who presumably didn't know each other and didn't know about each other's near-death experiences. They just registered on website what they had experienced. And in both of these cases, they had been greeted by a spiritual entity who said, "You're about to meet Jesus." And the experiencer is like, "Okay." And the spiritual entity said, "How would you like him to appear? Because he's very happy to appear in whatever way is easiest for you to perceive." And so it is very much the possibility that we influence how things appear in near-death experiences based on what we are prepared to perceive. Some people will say, for example,
I will just say, I just gotta add this really fast. Mm-hmm. The one time that I met Jesus this was an astral state.
Yeah.
Like, he was standing at the bed when I left my body, so I'm not going to question it, right? I don't recall thinking that what he looked like was important in any way at all. I've had people ask me, well, what did Jesus look like? Was he let's be fair, what they mostly want to know is, was Jesus a brown guy, is what they're asking me. Unfortunately, that's where we're at still. And something I don't know? What I got was that figure, the silhouette like that, standing at the edge of my bed. The energy was absolutely like, I knew immediately who I was dealing with. But I never, once I knew the energy I was dealing with, and I don't know. I never
appearance just completely faded away.
It doesn't matter.
Not important.
Yeah. A homie is a spirit, right? He doesn't have a physical form. At least not anymore. And so it's really kind of irrelevant. And anytime people ask me that, I'm like, you know what? The dude showed up at the foot of my bed and wanted me to follow him, so I did. He had a message, and I went with him. But I wasn't staring at the color of his eyes. Do you know what I mean?
You weren't whipping out your spiritual phone to snap a selfie with them.
No, exactly. It wasn't like that at all. It was, very good humored sort of fellow.
Yeah.
Because I'm not at all a Christian. So at the time, I was like, I don't know what you're doing here, because I'm not one of yours.
You sure
know
you
what
got
I
the
mean?
right address,
yeah,
buddy?
exactly. I was like, I'm not one of yours, so I'm not sure what you're doing here. But, he seemed very good-natured about that. Like, I know that, obviously. But I have a message, so let's go. He didn't seem to care. Like, there was no sort of judgment or malice or anything there. Very, as far as I can tell, take it or leave it, right? A very chill dude, very personable.
Sounds about right.
Not at all concerned about whether or not you're a Christian, this guy. So, anyway, moving on.
That the being of light was God. It's like they had the experience of this being of light, this all-knowing, all-loving force. So they see this being of light and they encounter and sometimes have a sense of merging with this being of light that's all-knowing, all-loving. And some people immediately interpret that this is God. And then other near-death experiencers will say, I don't know what that was. Maybe that was God, but it's certainly not God the way that I learned about God. So I'm hesitant to put that label on it, but I'll just call it the light or the being of light because that's the form that it took. So people can be interpreting sometimes based on their personal or cultural background. And sometimes when things don't exactly match what they expected, they'll be a little circumspect and not make a commitment as to what that force was. Can we predict who will have a near-death experience? Because to drop way back to the beginning, one of the things we know is that of all the people who survive a close brush with death through serious injury or illness, 80 to 90% of them will come out the other side and say that they don't remember anything unusual at all. They may or may not have lost consciousness. Even if they did when they were unconscious, they have no memory of anything. Only about 10 to 20% of people report a near-death experience, which is an experience of their consciousness functioning apart from their physical body and observing the material world or observing and participating in a transmaterial domain, that is, a world that is not of the material world, but still has environments and entities in it. And so the question arises, why do 80 to 90% of people not remember anything and 10 to 20% of people remember something? Is there something different between those two groups of people? And to encapsulate a whole lot of research into this question, the answer is no. There is no reliable difference between people who do and don't remember NDEs. And furthermore, some people, for one reason or another, have more than one close brush with death, and sometimes they'll have an NDE in one, but not in another. So we truly have no idea. I like to say that heaven only knows why some people have NDEs. And when I say have, I should actually say why some people recall and report a near-death experience, whereas most people don't. We know there are some cases where people actually recall it, but they don't report it until years later. They'll then admit that they had had an NDE but never spoke about it. But that's a very small number of people. And we also know of cases where people, they say they truly did not remember having an NDE until years later. Something might happen that triggers their memory. So it might be that the people who don't report one had one but aren't reporting it, or had one but don't remember it. But it probably is the case for most people that they just truly didn't have one. And that bears out because in studies of after effects.
So just briefly, it's going to be a lot like the question of why some people remember more of their dreams and some people remember their dreams at all.
It's pretty random.
Well, it has, I wouldn't call it random, but it has a lot to do with whether or not, whether or not that information would be easily integrated by the physical ego personality and or beneficial to the physical ego personality. After coming back, is it something, one, that your human self can accept and integrate? Some people's human personalities, earth personalities are inflexible. They wouldn't integrate that knowing very well. For whatever reason. There's all personalities are different. Some of them are more rigid, some are more flexible, more malleable, more willing to change viewpoints, right? Some people's personalities would not handle the integration of that information well, so it gets buried.
Right.
Because it would destabilize the human personality. And for people who have a more flexible personality, like, I can change my mind. What I know doesn't necessarily have to be right. It's not going to destabilize the human personality to bring back an experience like that. But it's also, for whatever reason, in that person's life path, helpful, beneficial for them to remember that information. It will change the course and give them, insight that helps for them to live a better kind of life moving forward, a more integrated life with that light that people don't know what to call. Like, we would call that source energy, or the perspective of all that is.
Right.
A lot of people call it God, which is okay too. It doesn't have a name really. It just depends on how you want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But so just like your dreams, like if you're like Dad, and you don't think your dreams are important, like, let's say you're somebody who thinks, oh, dreams are just the random firing of neurons in my brain while I sleep. It's just garbage information my brain is processing while I sleep. You're less likely to actually remember and interact with your dreams if you yourself don't think they're very important. Then your mind shuffles them into the file of not important, don't need to remember this. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's all going to be individual based on the personality construct. So I wouldn't call it random, but it's not anything I think that science could pinpoint. Is it's not going to be genetic, or it's not going to be cultural, or anything like that. It has to do with whether or not that information is easily integrated and or useful to the personality construct.
So could someone make themselves recall more dreams by taking them more seriously, like adopting that mindset?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have a personal interest in remembering more of your dreams, just keep a little notebook next to your bed before you go to sleep and write down, I intend to remember my dreams, before you go to bed. And it may take a little while for that to work.
It kind of takes a bit of time for it to get ingrained in the brain.
Right, because you're changing your mental algorithm. It's just like your YouTube channel. If you wanted to start clicking on dreams, you know what I mean? Like, you might click on a dream video, maybe another one pops up, but if you keep clicking on them...
It's like how my YouTube channel's gotten more and more videos along
exactly.
these lines lately.
The more you click on that, the more your mental algorithm brings it to the forefront. Oh, you're interested in this, you're engaging in this, then we'll bring you more of it. So it's really about retraining your mental algorithm to bring you more of the information you want. It works just like your social media feeds. Just click on the stuff you want more of. And then when you do start having more dreams, jot them down, or just what you can remember of them, even if you get fragments.
All right, makes sense.
And it will train you to be able to remember more of your dreams.
Which also, I guess, would potentially increase the likelihood of you having a memory of a near-death experience.
Potentially. I mean, so the closer that you are, the more of your dreams you remember, you're bringing your waking self closer to your subconscious self. And that is actually, it's like stretches. It's actually helping the ego personality, the waking personality, become more flexible of a personality. Because weird stuff happens in dreams. True. So the more you write them down and pay attention to them, the more you're going, wow, that's a part of my mind. It's a part of my subconscious. It's a part of who I am. You know, you become a little bit more flexible about who you are when you integrate and accept the dreams that you're having.
Right.
So...
people who report having had a near-death experience report significantly greater after effects than people who survived a close brush with death without an NDE. And so there's no reason to think these people had an NDE who say they probably didn't, but those who did have very characteristic after effects. And you've probably heard those after effects, people that almost to a person, they report that they absolutely lost their fear of death as a result of the experience, because they now know from experience what the first moments of death are like, and they feel confident that what they experienced characterizes what death will continue to be like if they had stayed dead. That's the biggest one, is the loss of fear of death. I like to break these down into psychological, spiritual, physical, and social after effects. And some of the other psychological ones besides loss of fear of death include things like becoming more compassionate, more emotionally sensitive to other people.
I will edit this out, but will you actually shut the door for me, please?
Thought I did.
We gotta remember to do that when we come in here. I don't know if the just bumped it or nobody's there, but if nobody
I could have swore it was closed, personally.
Well, at the very least, it definitely just moved.
Yeah.
Is there anyone there?
No, just open the crack.
More like committed to be helpful.
Are you having fun yet in the garage? Because there's nobody there, and it's like 2:00 in the morning
You're
here.
like...
There's the door just definitely moved. Having fun in the garage yet, brother?
Oh.
Full and kind to other people. That's a lot because of the life review. And then some of the spiritual after effects are becoming more interested in spiritual matters and sometimes tending to become more spiritual rather than religious, although some people do become more religious, but it's a minority. Most people leave organized religion but become much more spiritual. And then also what are sometimes called spiritual gifts, where people have the ability to see the future, to know what another person is thinking, and clairvoyance, see what's happening at distant locations and things like that, what we call paranormal abilities. And then in the physical domain are people, a lot of times after an NDE, their metabolism changes, they may need to eat less food. They may have an aversion to certain foods. They may just generally more sensitive to medication, to pollutants and allergens and things like that. And then also in the physical domain are what are called electromagnetic effects, where electromagnetic things in the person's environment go kaflooey in their presence. And then this in the social realm, you can imagine how all these other changes, if the person has psychological, spiritual, and physical changes, they're essentially not the same person they were before their near-death experience, and that can have repercussions in their social world. The reason I'm interested in veridical perception is not just because near-death experiencers almost always say that the experience itself was absolutely real, and often they'll say it's realer than here. I remember in my dissertation study, I was reading the questionnaire response of one of my participants, and when I asked, would you be open if after your NDE, if someone had approached you to talk with you about the extent to which the experience felt real, would you have been willing to talk with them? And rather than answer that question, what he wrote was that experience was realer than sitting here writing this response to you. And that always, just really stuck with me. Subjectively, it's absolutely real. Near-death experiencers come back with some lessons. And what they tend to say is that our purpose in physical existence is to advance in our capacity to love, to become more loving to each other and to ourselves. In order for humanity to hear the message, they have to really believe that near-death experiencers are bringing a genuine message from the spiritual domain of a reality that is incontrovertible, that this is the nature of reality, this is the nature of human existence, and we need to get on board with it.
Okay, so this is the nature of reality. Sorry, sorry. And it is... Humans, when transitioning, will often experience that feeling of unconditional love. And it's a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And like I said earlier, when this can be beneficial and well integrated for the personality, then they're more likely to bring the experience back with them. As you can see, it's really, it can be really life-changing for people. It's a total wake-up call, right? It's all of the things we become so used to here in physical reality that we don't notice it. The fact that your knee probably hurts a little bit right now, or your back, or you might be thirsty in the back of your throat. All of the discomfort, the things that we don't even realize, like fear. Fear itself is a physical reality concept. Like if there's no physical form, there's no fear of that physical form being damaged, and there is nothing but eternity and safety. So there's no reason for hate. There's no reason for the judgment that people think that there is. There's no reason for fear or anguish. That type of thing is just not a thing from that broader perspective, right? But it can feel very much overwhelming, like love bombing, when you experience it for the first time.
A little bit of an overload.
Right. And so
like you've tasted sugar before, but you've never had a pixie stick before.
Right. It's like you mainlined the pixie stick of love.
Yeah. When
you cross over, and it's a very different feeling from the feeling that we have here in physical reality, where we love, but we put a lot of attachment and self-worth on the people that we love. So like we tend to, if this person didn't, buy me flowers or take me out, then they don't love me. I'm not worth that. Or, if my kids aren't performing well, it reflects poorly on me, even if I love them, but they're capable of reflecting poorly on me because we associate a lot of our self-worth with each other and each other's abilities. So it's not actually unconditional, because we let other people affect our self-worth so much here. But there's none of that on the other side. Your angels and guides are valid and worthy regardless of what you're doing. So there's literally none of that that judgment or feeling invalid, none of that there at all. You don't get anything but unconditional love and worthiness off of energy beings like that, and they all radiate it. So the minute you cross over, you're communicating via energy fields. And I've told you this before, is like the minute you come into contact with something else, you feel and know everything there. So when you get met by anything, even that light on the other side, what you're experiencing is your natural your natural empathy, the ability to sense everything else around you energetically. It just feels like love and safety and comfort, because it's so different from what it feels like here, for sure.
Yeah, it's like the difference between having like a little glass of water that you occasionally sip from as opposed to like the ocean over there.
Absolutely, the vastness of the love of all that is. And so it's a very transforming experience, and I have no doubt whatsoever that people who have near death experiences come back from that and are like, there's no reason for us to be mad at each other. There's no reason for us to hate each other or the way that we act with each other, because there's nothing like that going on upstairs. Right?
Right.
I can very easily see how that's, you know what I mean?
The conclusion, yeah.
Yeah.
Some people who haven't had experiences like this are on board too, but a lot are not. And understandably, because these experiences are of a qualitatively different nature than our normal material lives. But if humanity is to hear this message, then that the reality of NDEs needs to be established. And that's kind of my most important intention in doing near-death related research.
That's very interesting. We will link the video in the description. Check her out. Give her a like and a subscribe. She's obviously done a lot of research and she's passionate about looking into it. I think that's amazing. I'm really grateful and appreciative of anybody who doesn't experience these things, but who takes a passionate interest in it and helps put some of this stuff out there.
Yeah, and it sounds like she's kind of gotten, like, a lot of what she says is reflective of what you said. Like, she's kind of got a pretty solid idea of things.
Well, no doubt she's probably talked to hundreds of people who've been through it, so she's very well researched, for sure. She knows what she's saying. I've never, like, personally been in physical peril. Like, I've never died, or at least not that I know of.
Not close enough-ish.
Well, I've considered the possibility that what I actually have is severe sleep apnea, and so I die a little bit every time it happens. So I don't know if that's what the spark was for whatever is going on with me. But to make a very long story very short, part of what I learned from the others on the other side, the spiritual beings on the other side, was how to act as a psychopomp, how to help people cross over. And by and large, most people's crossing is very peaceful and easy. I'm sure that, out of all of the experiences, it's really very an easy thing, because it is so safe and so comforting. But sometimes what I get called to do is help work with people who are having a more difficult crossing. Usually because it's just very sudden, so there wasn't
time to prepare.
Time to process. Yeah, there wasn't time to process what just happened. Or because the circumstances surrounding what just happened were very stressful or traumatic. So when you cross into non-physical reality, you're literally building the environment around you. So if people's energy is still stuck in what just happened, then they're not letting in the energy to move forward. It's like you kind of get yourself stuck in in your mental algorithm. So, like, and I think I've told you before, I don't know if I've told you I don't know if I've mentioned this on here before, but for example, I had an instance where I was called to and wound up in the passenger seat of a guy who was definitely crossed over, but he was still gripping the steering wheel and staring at the concrete barrier in front. It was like he was still in his car and staring at the concrete barrier and was just like
didn't know
stuck,
what was going
like not
on.
processing what just happened. So in an instant like that, he needed a little bit of
a push,
a little bit of
hand.
Assistance, exactly. So in that case, once he noticed I was in the passenger seat with him and panicked a little bit because he hadn't even noticed I was there, I said, it's okay, but I think that we need to get out of the car and move beyond the barrier.
Yeah.
Right? So how about we just get out of the car and walk beyond that barrier? Again, there's usually some symbolism of movement that's really helpful for people. You know, you can add things like, you know, we're going to go beyond the barrier, and it helps subconsciously. It's starting to help trigger what happened for people. A lot of different, like every transition experience is going to be different, but none of it is scary. It's like suddenly just being in a dream state. And even if the worst case scenario is you're not sure exactly what's happening, or you feel weird, like, why am I my conscious self in this dream? Because for people who don't lucid dream, that's a weird feeling. So
Yeah.
but it's a very supported process. It's a very, very supported process from the other side. There's not only all kinds of other spiritual beings who are there and ready to assist, loved ones who can easily come and assist, but there's also, in cases where that energy is having a difficult time getting through, there's people like me who are physically focused humans who can integrate with that confusion, like I understand, and help to transition you to a point where the energies that need to get through to you can reach you and help get you the rest of the way there.
Basically, if there's certain people that are stuck in a certain way, you can kind of help pull them out of the muck of it and get them unstuck.
Communication on the other side is it's a frequency of love and light. And so if you're in a very dense human energy still, not letting go of the physical plane very well, sometimes someone like me will be employed or called to come in, because I can interact with the dense. I'm physically focused myself at this point, so I can interact.
They need a
with
specialist.
Yeah, I can help get people from that dense physical energy into a more dissipated or disseminated energy, where the other personalities on the other side can pick up the slack from there and get you where you need to go. But it's a very supported process, and it's not at all, once you get there, it's not at all frightening or difficult. So,
right.
But yeah, she sounds really interesting. I'll have to look her up and check it out.
That's near-death experiences.
Yeah, that's what I've got on that. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment if you think I'm a crazy person. If you think I'm used to being called a crazy person, so it doesn't hurt my feelings anymore. Like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And we will see you next time on Unraveling the Unexplained.
Good evening.